Welcome to the All Out Leadership Podcast, hosted by Pastor Eric Lawson, where each episode is uniquely designed to help you live all out by bringing you practical leadership from a biblical perspective delivered in 10 minutes or less. So whether you're a business leader, serving in ministry, or simply looking to grow in your leadership, this podcast is for you. Before we dive into this week's topic, make sure to subscribe to the podcast and download the show notes at ericlawson.com/podcast. And while you're at it, feel free to share the content on social media. Now, let's join Pastor Eric for this week's conversation.
Welcome to another edition of the All Out Leadership Podcast. And hey, guess what? We're almost done. Finally, on the last of three when it comes to stewardship. We've been looking at that we're called to be stewards of time, talent, and we begin with treasure. And I'm going to get really practical as we get into this last section, because I have found that, when we're struggling financially, it impacts our ability to focus at work. It impacts our ability to serve in church. And so really a lot of this that we've been writing, I've been really writing with staff in mind, volunteers in mind, and there'll be other people that are going to benefit from it. But that's kind of my target demographic as I'm writing this. And so I've just known in ministry, especially early on when I struggled financially, it really caused a lot of pain. It was a distraction. I couldn't feel like at times I could give ministry 100%. And I know I'm going to have staff and I'm going to have great volunteers who are in that same boat, that I think you're going to find a lot of help from this. Also, over the years, I've seen a lot of people, unfortunately, just step out of ministry early because they needed more money. And really, if one were to sit down with them, go through their finances, it wasn't that they needed more money. Again, we're all grateful for more money, but it wasn't that more money would solve their problems. It's they needed to be better with the money that they had, because Jesus tells us that if we're unfaithful in least, we're going to be unfaithful in much. But if we're faithful in little, we'll be faithful in much. And so I've just found no matter how much money somebody has, it never solves money problems if they're not good at managing money. And so I'm going to get real practical, because I want to help you financially succeed wherever God's placed you, whether it's here at Element staff, whether you're a volunteer, whether you're bivocational, whatever it is. I believe God's called us to have a level of financial success and freedom. And that looks different for everybody, but I believe God has a great plan for you. And Jesus understands this, and this is why we see that in the Gospels, of the 38 parables Jesus taught, 16 were concerned with money and possession. That's like almost half of the stories that Jesus told revolved around finances. The Bible offers over 500 verses on prayer, about 500 verses on faith, but there's more than 2,000 verses on money and possessions. That's 4 times more. Why? Because God understands this is such an important, integral part that impacts really every part of our life. So God has a lot to say to help us succeed. We're going to look at a passage and we're going to learn 5 key principles to reach financial freedom inside of this story. And this is what we're going to unpack over the next several episodes. Luke 16, it's verse 1 through 3, and then we're going to read verses 10 and 13. He also said to his disciples, there was a certain rich man who had a steward, and an accusation was brought to him that this man was wasting his goods. So he called to him and said to him, "What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your stewardship, for you can no longer be steward." Then the steward said within himself, "What shall I do?" And then he was shrewd, and he did certain things which later the Lord commended him for it. And so we pick up with Jesus' words, "He that is faithful in least is also faithful in much. He who is unjust in least is unjust in much. Therefore, if you've not been faithful in unrighteous mammon, who will commit to you the truest riches of heaven? No one can serve 2 masters. Either he'll hate the one, love the other, or else he'll be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon." So we learn 5 things inside of this parable. There's more, but we're going to draw out 5. The first thing is that God has more than enough for you. It begins with, there was a certain rich man who had a steward. We're the steward. God is the rich man. And we need to understand that God is truly all that we need. He has all that we need, and God himself is more than enough. Too many of us have a scarcity mentality when we think of God, and we think of God as stingy, kind of like Johnny's dad. Little Johnny was in his math class, and a teacher asked him to solve an addition problem. And he said, "Johnny, if you have $5 and you ask your father for $3 more, how many dollars do you have?" Johnny said, "Oh, that's easy. I have $5. And the teacher replied, "Well, Johnny, you don't know your arithmetic." Johnny said, "You don't know my dad." And a lot of us kind of think that view of God, that God is stingy, that, we have to beg him for $3 and he probably isn't going to give it to us. But several names in which God actually reveals himself to us actually have to do with the provider. One of them is El Shaddai, which means more than enough. Abraham called Jehovah Jireh, because the Lord will provide. And he experienced God as a provider when God provided that ram instead of him having to sacrifice his son Isaac. And so inside of here, Jesus highlights that money, he called it mammon. He didn't call it money, he called it mammon, because mammon was the Syrian god of riches. And so it's interesting that what we call money, God calls mammon, because until our money's sanctified and it's God's, it's just still under the God of this world. It's still under the spirit of this world. And so God says, you're serving him or you're serving money. But God looks at how we use money, whether we use money to serve him, we use money to steward and manage and build wealth wisely, to reach financial freedom and have generosity. He looks at that, or he looks at, are we, serving money and using God to serve money? And so worry is a symptom that helps us understand whether or not we have misplaced trust. A lot of us go around trying to treat symptoms of deeper rooted issues. Worry is a symptom. When you have a headache, you might take aspirin and it's nice for the pain, but that headache, if it continues to reoccur, it might be a symptom of a deeper problem that you need to see addressed. Well, a lot of us, we read books on, about overcoming worry, and we're just dealing with the symptom. Again, worry is a symptom. And so when we worry continually about finances and money, it's because we put our trust in the wrong God. Because if your trust is in mammon, then you're always going to be worried. And so what we're going to look at next week is worry regarding our finances, how to deal with the worry in our finances. And then we're going to move on to some more principles, and we're going to get really practical. We're going to get a little bit into investing and getting out of debt, because I just really believe God wants you to have financial freedom. And so we're going to continue on with that next week.
Thank you for joining us on the All Out Leadership Podcast. We hope you gained new biblical insight that challenged you to grow in your leadership. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, we would love your help in getting the content out farther. You can help by subscribing to the podcast at ericlawson.com/podcast and telling others about it. Next week, Pastor Eric will be back with another episode. So until then, we hope you have a great week being an all-out leader.